Warning. Oh, here we are.
Secondly, had a meeting last Sunday with Dale Bluestein, the videographer and producer of the documentary that we're doing. We're looking now at probably a December 15th for the first go at it. I got a chance to see some of the footage from the interviews. We got some really good stuff. I'm really very excited by what I'm seeing, and he's doing something interesting. Dale is headed to the Czech Republic at the beginning of the Second World War, when it was very clear, particularly in the Czech Republic, that small synagogues were going to be looted, etc. About 1,100 Torah scrolls were identified and sent to synagogues in the Czech Republic, who since between then and now distributed the Torahs around the world to free cities. The problem is that the whole process was run through index cards. So no, seriously. So today there's confusion, great confusion as to where some of those Torahs are, etc. So in commemoration of the 80th year of that distribution of Torahs, there's a service being held in Prague in late November, and he's going over to do a documentary on it. And I thought it was a noble thing to give him some time to finish that and then work full time on our piece. And so that's happening. As many of you know, Mickey Lee is in Europe, traveling with I think it's the DC Men's Chorus, doing concerts in Prague, in Budapest, and in Vienna. And he will be chairing our November meeting, which should be exciting. What an amazing experience to, first of all, to be able to sing. Secondly, to be able to do it in those venues. It's really amazing. Marv, you and I talked during the month about the whole notion of good and welfare. If you remember that.
Yes, yeah.
You want to kind of brief people on our conversation? And
well, I think we've had great meetings, and I think the whole new format since we've done it has been very wonderful. But we find out that people have not been feeling well, or there's things going on in their life kind of coincidentally. So I thought it might be kind of interesting if the guys want to share or any tidbits they have to share. They may not have anything every month, but I thought it might be just a nice idea if anybody has got anything they want to share with us, so we can at least know what's going on. I did not, for example, I did not know the condition of shell block. I feel very bad that I had, found out later. So I just thought it might be an idea, and Bruce and I discussed, and we thought we'll throw it out there to see if anybody wants to say anything, or not necessarily. They don't have to if they don't want to.
Yeah, Marvin, I think that's a good idea, but the traditional, I'd like to add something to it. The traditional good and welfare is usually individuals who make an evaluative statement about the meeting they've had.
Right.
An insight, something they've learned or something they want to share. I'd like to combine that with it too, because we should, like today, we're going to have a good presentation from Adam. And if that reminds anybody of something they have the light bulb went on, then I think we should do that too. And that's good and welfare as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Who is, I can see who's missing. Who is missing that should be here?
well, Ostro had something else he needed to tend to tonight. Mickey is out of Mickey Lee is out of the country. Shel Schreiberg is in DC at a board meeting tonight. Al, have you heard from it?
Manny,
Where's Manny?
wasn't he in Europe with
Did he go with Mickey?
I think so.
yeah, I think
Okay.
they did.
Okay, that's all I know.
And I think Dale Dobrin said he couldn't attend. I saw an email.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think Philip, I don't know if he's on, I can't see who the participants are, but I think he's on his way to a bat mitzvah in Chicago.
He's definitely not on yet.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I didn't look at the participants yet.
His
And Mark-
granddaughters,
I don't
Mark,
know where Mark is. I don't know about Mark.
is Phil coming down for his granddaughter's bat mitzvah?
Yes, yeah.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay.
I said to him, we didn't get an invitation. He says, nobody got an invitation. It's just a very, very small function, I guess, just family.
Anybody
Mark-
else have feelings about the concept Mark's talking about?
No, I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
I think Mark, I know he's going to Morocco, but I don't know if he's left yet.
No, he's not. My sister's on that trip also, and I think it's the very end of next week.
Okay. So he'll probably just be late.
Oh,
Yeah, and Steve is usually tied up until like 7:20 or so.
Yeah.
So maybe with that, I think the point that we talked about, Al, was that if some shares with us, they're going through a medical something. The question to them is it okay if I share that with the guys at the meeting or not, so that we don't breach confidentiality?
that's
And
true.
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Not everybody is as forthcoming as
Yeah.
Right.
we are, Bruce.
all right, I think there's enough of a sense
Yeah.
for that. Okay, Mickey, let me turn it over to you for introductions and comments, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm sorry that Adam couldn't be here tonight, and COVID attacked his family, so he's home recuperating. And his voice, he's lost his voice and some other things, so he won't be here. I'm sorry though. Adam has really got a great story to tell about our family and what's going on in the world. As many of us.
Hey, Mickey, hang on. Adam, you're muted. Still,
Hello.
there you go.
Yeah, I'm right
Yeah.
here. Okay. All right. Well, I can start,
oh, good.
Good.
but
Adam.
I need somebody to enable screen sharing. I
Gotcha.
can't do it without screen share. Can you do
Gotcha.
that?
Hold on one. Yeah, give me a second.
I'm the co-host. Okay. Good.
Good thing there's at least one of us that knows how to enable screen sharing or
Yeah.
knows what it is.
Okay.
The host,
yeah,
the host has it, Stan. The host has it.
Okay,
Adam,
I'm a co-host
Steve
now.
Heller. Adam, Steve Heller is just coming on. You might want to just wait
okay.
5 seconds.
Tell him to enable video.
Yeah.
I can't because he's muted. Oh, Heller,
Yeah.
Steve,
Okay,
Here he
I
comes.
need you on video, Steve.
can you see me now?
No,
No.
bottom left corner,
Oh,
camera with a red line.
oh,
through it.
yes, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, there. No?
There you go.
No.
No,
No? Huh. All
there you
right.
go.
go.
There you go.
Steve, could you turn it off?
Good evening. And
Hi there.
Adam's here. Hello, Adam.
Hey, Steve. I'm. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I'll start. With Steve brought up with me, he'd seen a presentation I'd done on my last book at the Milwaukee Jewish Museum.
Oh, yeah.
And he thought it would be nice if I came and talked to you guys, and if Steve asks, I do it.
There you
So
go.
so here I am. This is usually I'm going to do a somewhat abbreviated version of this because I've learned presentations on Zoom can get long, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint, and you should be able to see.
Your go.
Okay, do you see is a black and white photo?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right. Well, I'm going to go. This is, like I said, this is a presentation I gave at the Milwaukee Jewish Museum and at the Baltimore Jewish Museum after the book was released, and because of COVID, I wasn't able to get out as much to do presentations on this book as my other one. But I'm glad to be able to talk to you guys. I think if anybody can appreciate this, it's you guys. So this is a photo that was taken. We're not quite sure of the date, but it was early 20th century. And the man on the far left holding the fedora, it looks like, is Abe Leader. That's my great grandfather. He was, this is right before he was inducted into the Tsar's army. This was taken in Russia, and he decided instead of fighting for the Tsar, he'd get out of Russia. So he emigrated, left his family behind in Russia, something that haunted him for his whole life. Family says Laura says he wanted to go to New York, but he ended up being a Galveston Jew and landed in Galveston, didn't speak the language, didn't have any real meaningful skills. So he did what immigrants and folks in emerging markets do when they don't have education. They start scrapping. And I'm going to jump you forward to a few years ago. This is a woman in Ohio scrapping rags. She's cutting rags. These are old bed sheets from a hospital, pre-COVID, that she's cutting up, and they're going to be sold as rags. And what I'm told is he started out picking rags, really anything, and selling them, and anything on the street would then be sold, and it could become rags. One very common progression that people in those days made is to go from rags to metal. And this is a pic I took in Shanghai I know I took this in 2002. And this is just your average rags to metal story. A guy taking whatever he was able to purchase at a construction site, looks like some window frames or something, and taking and selling it. Abe Leader did that too. So that was a good day. If you could have gotten your hands on that, that's a really good load. And Abe, probably had a cart of some kind as a bicycle cart, but he had some way of conveying that stuff. On a bad day in China, you might be doing this, sorting through the garbage. Maybe you'll find some rags. This is in Beijing. A couple I came across, they live and work in a shipping container. If you can imagine what that's like. And there's a caste system in Beijing. There's the garbage pickers, and then there's the recycling pickers. And it's very much organized like the mafia. And you don't cross each other's territory, though you certainly can sell back and forth to each other. So these are the recyclers, and they were going to give this garbage back to the garbage people. Now I want to jump ahead 10 years. This is taken in Guangdong province. If you don't know Guangdong, you've heard of Guangdong. It's the manufacturing capital of the world still. And because of that, it's one of the raw material importing capitals of the world. And they imported for years and years and years a lot of scrap. The man in the striped shirt is a wonderful guy by the name of Raymond Lee, and he's standing in his scrap processing warehouse with his family. That's his wife, Yao Ye, on his right, and that's cousin Yao on his left. And I can't remember the name of the guy in the pleather jacket, but anyway, it's cousin Yao is going to be important. Raymond didn't start out in the recycling business. He started out in a small town working in a chemical and paint factory, and then he married his wife, and her family was in the scrap business. And she said, if you want to make some money and get along in life, you should join the family business. So that's kind of what he did. And it was a good time to get into it because in the 1990s, China was just coming up and they needed a lot of raw materials. And so anything that European or Japanese or Australian scrapyards could bring in, they would buy. So what would they bring in? They would bring in things like, like here, electric motors. Everybody owns these. Electric motors, you have them in washing machines, you have them in vehicles, you have them in industrial equipment, you have them in all kinds of things. So you bring those in, the labor is and was cheap in China, and you would break the copper off from the steel and sort it all out, and then it'd be melted down and made into products. Or you could import wire. And wire is great. It's got copper in it. And one way they processed wire was to set it on fire back in the day, and you'd get a bunch of crusty copper, or you could do this. This was a little bit more advanced, and we use these kinds of techniques to this day to some extent. There's a wire stripper, and it just strips the insulation off, and you can see in the back there they've got copper. And again, it's a way of feeding China's raw material needs. Over time, as China grew, so did the volumes of scrap grow. I know, some of you may know what you're seeing here. This is a shipping container full of copper that was imported probably from Japan, because I know where this is. And the contents of that container, it was all copper. And at the time this picture was taken, that was probably worth about $80,000 right there. Raymond grew quickly, he grew quickly with China's market. An emerging market is a great place to be for a recycler. So back to Abe Leader. For Abe Leader, you could say the U.S. economy, the United States in the early 20th century, right up to World War II, was an emerging market economy, and he did pretty well. He would buy scrap, just like these folks in China that I've just been showing pictures of. Whatever was available, he would buy it. And he really grew during World War II. But his greatest moment was really after World War II. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is an invoice of his from 1947. And the United States was a great place to be recycling right after World War II, because suddenly the country was pretty rich. On average, Americans turned over their cars every 3 years. So if you're turning over your car every 3 years, you can imagine you're turning over a lot of other stuff. And he grew. And you can see he grew enough. There's Leader Brothers to buy a crane and to buy a scrapyard. And and he prospered, and he was able to, prosper with his family. And so here's his family. I don't know the date of this photo, but I think it's in the early 1950s. And you can see Abe in the back there. He's the older gentleman. And down to his right is my grandmother, Betty. And she stayed in the business her whole life. One of the great stories that she liked to tell me was her older brother, Mort, who's all the way upper row to the left in the photo. Mort, his bar mitzvah, the way they paid for the bar mitzvah, the family paid for the bar mitzvah, is all the kids were sent down to the basement to clean, that is, separate metals for several weeks to pay for it. So that's a junkyard bar mitzvah, if you will. So there she is there. And some of you knew her. There she is in the scrapyard, a couple of years before she passed away. I think this would have been taken around 2009, if I could guess. Some of you may even know the guy on the right. He works in the scrapyard still. That's Rocky Sikorsky, who was a heavyweight fighter who at one time fought George Foreman. So I did not really go into the business. I was around it for a while. I did a few things within it, but I became a writer, a scrap journalist, a journalist overseas based in Shanghai. And one of the things I did for years was travel the world in the 2000s, looking at this globalized world of recycling. Many of you read about it, heard about it. All our recycling was going to China, to India, to Africa. I was the person who was following it. This was the first of a series I did, mostly based in Mumbai. It was incredibly rewarding. It taught me the world. And along the way, I accumulated a lot of anecdotes and favorite stories, many of which went into my first book, Junkyard Planet. And I just want to give you guys an idea of how I write and sort of put together a book like this. This is a photo I took, I believe this was 2006. I was invited to a friend's scrapyard, again in Guangdong, southern China, manufacturing capital. And he was showing me around, and I saw this pile that I thought were extension cords. And there are a few extension cords in there, but as I got closer, I saw that they were Christmas tree lights. So you can see the scale of it. And that was the biggest pile of Christmas tree lights I had ever seen. And I was starting to think at that time about writing a book about the recycling industry. So I immediately asked, how and where do you recycle this stuff into the metals? And he said, well, we don't have time today. But it stuck in my head. And I, when I got back to Shanghai, I started calling around. And long story short, a friend of mine, a friend of mine introduced me to Johnson Zhang, and he was a guy based in Vancouver who used to drive around the United States and Canada buying recycling that he'd pay cash for it and then send it back to China. And so Johnson was really into buying Christmas tree lights. It was important to him. So he said he'd take me with him to see Christmas tree lights in the US and then send me back to China to see how they were recycled. So Johnson took me all over the US. This picture I remember clearly was taken in Indiana. This one I think was Ohio. And this was definitely in North Carolina. These were about to be exported to China. So after a week of traveling around with him, he said, when you get back to China, you go and see my friend, Raymond Lee, who you saw at the beginning of the presentation. And so that's what I did. And, Raymond is interesting. He's not in the he's the one guy you don't see in the photo. You only see his legs in the brown trousers down to the left there. But this is his whole family. And like Jews did it, the Chinese scrap dealers do it too. It's a family business. It starts as a family business and it grows and grows and grows. And so if you're gonna go and see Raymond's factory, you got to go and meet his family. So Raymond, after dining with me, it was a great meal, as they always were when Raymond would take me. He then took me to his Christmas tree light recycling facility. I am hoping, let me see if I can turn down the volume on this. I'm going to walk you through how they recycle Christmas tree lights in China circa 2010, or maybe not. Okay, I guess that's not going to, well, let's try this one more time. There we go. Okay. I'm going to cut the sound. So you cut them up and you throw them into this machine, which is a shredder that's steam, not smoke, because up top you can see a tube going in there with water. And it's steam coming off there because it's so hot. The blades are spinning around and cutting the stuff up into that goop you see. And that goop is plastic, copper, brass, and water. And what happens is they put it on these shaker tables. It's kind of like panning for gold. The tables are tilted upwards and you have water shooting across, and the heavy stuff, the copper and a little bit of brass, goes off one way, and the plastic and the glass goes off the other. It's super simple. And it really works. And you're going to see in a moment just how pure this is. Well, you can see the copper right there. And the camera's going to tilt down any moment now. I should have hurried up, huh? There we go. And there you go. That's how you start recycle Christmas tree lights. And people always ask me what happens to the copper. That copper, here you can see it a little bit better, would be sold to Christmas tree light or manufacturing facilities. So it basically goes round and round, sent back to the US and Europe. So you hear about the circular economy. That's the circular economy you hear about. Here's somebody shoveling that copper. And the really interesting thing about this is, if you remember early on, Cousin Yao, who I showed you, Cousin Yao went to one of the best engineering schools in southern China, and he could have gone and worked for any company, but he decided he wanted to work for Raymond because he said that's where the money was. So that's how you do it in China. So let's go back to Minneapolis. This is the scrapyard I grew up in, and here's my Bubby again. There's one more. Yes, there she is at the desk, and this is her office. Just some of you might have stopped by there at one point. There's two things to note in the office. The shredder, if you needed anything to disappear, she would make it disappear in her shredder. And the refrigerator, which had her store of kosher hot dogs, not always buns, but if you're a good customer or friend of the family, you got a kosher hot dog. When I was living in China, I would call her all the time, and I would talk to her at the front desk there. And it was always funny because I could hear her talking to the truck drivers, taking weights on the scale, that kind of thing. And she'd always ask me where I was, and I'd tell her, and she would sound, a little bit worried. And I'd say, well, don't worry, I'm with scrap people. And she says, oh, okay. Because that's what she knew. She grew up with them. You know what I mean? So long as I was with scrap people, it was all good. And I never thought about it much more deeply until a few years ago. I mean, but I would call her from places like this, and she could hear the metal clanking. This is actually one of my favorite pics. This was taken in 2002 at a place called Shanghai Sigma. Those are shredded American automobiles there that were, the shredded metal was shipped to China and people would sort it. You can see very skilled sorters. This is not These are people who really know what they're doing. They could pick out the various types of metals. And I'd call her from places like this. But when I really started thinking about why she was comfortable with me being with scrap people, it was actually here. This is in Cotonou, which is the capital of the commercial capital of Benin, which is Benin is a country in West Africa. And I spent some time there looking at clothing recycling a few years ago. And I was there with the guy in the orange shirt, Michael, a tough character. And the question that I always get from people is, how do you get people to let you into a place like this? Because this is used clothes from Canada and the US and is being sorted there, and you can't just walk in the door. And it's really a matter of getting people comfortable with you. Every journalist has their own way of doing it, but for scrap people like Michael, I would tell him that I grew up around it, and that usually broke the ice. But when I was in this factory, I told Michael the day before this that I grew up in it and told him about the family business. And as he and I are walking through here, he looked at me and he said, I believe you now, because who would lie about doing this kind of work? And it really, it was interesting to me because, it's the scrap business is an outsider business, and it was kind of brought home to me at that moment. You don't brag about being an outsider very often and doing this kind of work, but, the Jews and Galveston who picked rags, it was sort of the same thing as what these guys are doing, not just the same activity, but socially. It's an outsider business. This is a very interesting fellow that I met many years ago, Mr. Nakatsuchi. He is was the chairman of the Japan Iron and Steel Recycling Association, or Institute, I think it is. And I interviewed him at one point in Tokyo. Very nice guy. It's a big trade association, very close to the government. He started out in the scrap business, family business. This is the best picture he could give to me of what the family business looked like, but you can see it looked pretty rough back in the days. This is the 1930s. He said piles of junk. It got better. This was a promo photo he gave me. I never actually visited his factory. I visited him in Tokyo and his operations in Osaka. And so it struck me as this is something to be very proud of. And so I asked him, as I often ask people who are in the scrap business, how did your family get into it? How did you start? And usually that gets an excited response. But for the first time ever, when I interviewed somebody, he got very quiet and sort of had a dark look on his face. And he says, well, we don't really talk about it. And I didn't realize I'd tripped a wire. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, our family were Korean immigrants in the 1930s. Now, if you know Korea and Japanese history, that meant that his family was enslaved by the Japanese and brought they were Koreans enslaved by the Japanese and brought to Japan. And Koreans to this day are heavily discriminated against, ethnic Koreans in Japan. Sound familiar? So he's in the scrap business. Back to this family, these are the Lees, the Lee family, and they were from Sichuan in Beijing. The people from Sichuan have a very hard time getting jobs in Beijing. They're looked down upon as being sort of low rent people, kind of the trash, if you will. And so what do? They get into recycling and garbage. This is Ghana, where I've spent a lot of time in the last few years, especially for the most recent book. There's a place called Agbogbloshie. If I say to you, recycling, electronics, Africa, you don't know it, but you're thinking of this place. All the pictures you've seen of burning electronics in Africa, they're 99% of them are taken here. That's a whole different story. But the people who come here, it's the people from northern Ghana. This is in southern Ghana. Southern Ghana is where the rich Ghanaians are. Northern Ghana is where the poor ones are. The poor ones can't get jobs. So they come here. And this is a tribal chieftain from northern Ghana who's sort of become the chieftain of this place in Ghana called Agbogbloshie, this giant scrapyard. His name is Yusuf Mahama. And he said to me, his job is to create space from our region so that people can work because they can't work anywhere else. Again, it's the same thing. Immigrants, outsiders, the scrap business, it's a very Jewish kind of thing, only it's not just a Jewish thing, it's an everybody kind of thing. When you look back on Abe Leader as a Jew, as an immigrant, in an emerging market, which the United States was. You can sort of see the parallels, the synchronicities there. And again, I'm finishing with my grandmother in her basement with her junk, her treasures. She would take things from the scrapyard and keep them for herself, sort of the scavenger instinct. But, you know, even though she never got to go to Agbogbloshie, Ghana, you know, to Tokyo or any of these other places, I think she's very much kin to these people as an immigrant daughter of a scrap dealer, that immigrant sensibility, not throwing things away, saving money, you know, and ultimately she had a deep respect for people who work. And so it's kind of a Jewish message. And it's one that I brought to the Milwaukee Jewish Museum, and very happy and proud to bring it to you guys. I'm not promoting the book, but it, you know, some of this was like I said, this is for the Milwaukee Museum, and I was talking about the book. So I will unshare the screen. I think I've unshared it, and here I am. And I've got a few minutes if there's any questions. I have to jump to a Bloomberg meeting in 10 minutes, unfortunately, with the Asia Pacific team, but happy to answer any questions you have. Or not.
What does the future look like?
For
Recycling for
the
these
future
family
for
businesses?
yeah, I mean, wherever there's manufacturing, there will always be recycling. They go together. You know, it's funny. I think in rich countries, the whole notion that you know, recycling feeds manufacturing processes has gotten lost. It's become this environmental imperative, and there certainly is an environmental imperative. But the whole reason that you recycle is so somebody can make something new into it. And manufacturers are demanding more and more recyclable materials, especially plastics, because consumers want it. They want those sustainable items. For the family businesses, there will always be a place for the small, nimble recyclers. In emerging markets like China, I mean, there were millions of recyclers at one point. Now, because the economy is becoming more developed, you see consolidation and there's fewer and fewer of them, but they're still family businesses. They're going to become more corporate, but there will remain small family business, because they're going to be willing to do things that the big corporate recyclers won't do.
Adam?
Yeah.
What are the chances that the next generation of minters will still be in the scrap business?
You'll have to ask my son, Sam. He's interested in junk.
I understand that he speaks Chinese already.
Yeah. Well, one of the funny things is, the last thing you guys want to hear me talk about is my son, but we notice he has that scavenger instinct. The story I always tell is, in preschool they had a end of year performance, and the kids were wearing sequins and stuff for the costumes for the dance, and everybody was dancing, and he was on the stage picking up the sequins that were falling off people's costumes. So that's, what does that tell you? So yeah.
Don't wake him.
Yeah.
That's good. Oh, yeah.
Anything
Adam?
else? Yeah.
Adam, didn't these pickers and selectors in these junkyards, wasn't their life cut short by doing that from smells and cuts and things like that? Or was that not a factor?
That's a great question. I think the way to look at it is, in countries without social safety nets, the ability to make a good living maybe outweighs, what the alternatives are. I mean, all of these folks who you see doing this work in emerging markets, they're coming in from agricultural regions. And the lifespan of a subsistence farmer or a semi-subsistence farmer in an agricultural part of China in the 1990s or early 2000s, or today in Ghana, or anywhere else I've gone, tends to be not very long. So who's to say? But I have never actually found any good peer-reviewed stuff on toxicology and its impacts on these workers. I think we have suspicions as to what the impacts are, but it would be really it would be a tough one to measure, because one, I don't know how you'd be able to get good medical histories anyway. Steve, you could probably speak to that. But the generations that were doing that, at least in China, they've moved on. They're not in the scrapyards anymore.
Adam, are you still writing about China? Are you still going to China?
Well, I'm not going to China right now. I can't get into China right now. I still write about it on occasion. Probably about every 3 or 4 weeks, I do something on China, because I'm writing opinion columns now, but China remains a strong interest and focus of my work. But it's, I have other stuff I write about now too.
Adam, what's your background?
Journalism. I mean, college, I studied philosophy, which is a great training ground to be a writer. So yeah, I consider myself, as a journalist. I started out as a trade journalist. That was my training. I see a lot of value in being a trade journalist. I don't, I'm officially an opinion columnist for Bloomberg now, and an author, but I still sort of think of myself as somebody who likes to get down and dirty with an industry and figure it out.
You can't go back to China because of the COVID issue?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors there. The COVID issue, I mean, just getting in right now is very, very difficult. Everybody's visa was canceled, so I'd have to apply for it when COVID started. So I'd have to get a new visa. Even if I got a visa, the quarantining situation is just really difficult. So I wouldn't want to do that. And then there's a political side to it. I don't really, and I've never really written things that I haven't written much that would really upset the Chinese government, but the political situation there has changed a great deal from when I left in 2014. And it just makes me a little nervous right now. Even the stuff you're hearing in the news this week, there's just a real consolidation of power there and a real emphasis on ideology. And I don't know that there'd be a place for me.
Interesting. Adam, one of the things that's always fascinated me is, and it's, I don't know where the crossover comes from, but most of the people, as you have described them, that got into the scrap business at the beginning, whether they were Jewish refugees or refugees from Ghana or from China or wherever, they were not sophisticated people. But what my impression of the scrap business is here, at least the metal scrap business, is that it is one of the great tax dodges in America, because who's to know what's in that pile of junk?
Yeah.
Right. And how much of it got sold and how much of it got kept and how much you made on it.
Right. I got news for you. It's one of the great tax dodges in Ghana, in Tokyo, and in Kuala Lumpur, and wherever else you go, because it's primarily in emerging markets, at least, it's a cash business, and you're right. I mean, defining inventory and the value of inventory, there's a lot of gamesmanship. I can tell you that a pile of, a 20-ton pile of something is worth X. Dispute me. You know what I mean? It gets complex, but one of the reasons you saw southern China become such an important manufacturing hub over the years is because their ports were very corrupt. And as a result, it was cheaper to bring in, that corruption enabled bringing in vast amounts of scrap for a very low price. It was one of the factors in southern China becoming a global scrap hub. Further north in China, they're more honest about the taxes. And it was too expensive to do it. So yeah, the more corrupt the port, the more likely in China it was that you would see scrap flowing into it. And that was all about taxes and duties. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I have to.
China's cut their intake of trash from us, haven't they?
Of recycling, yes, yeah. They have. They felt. There's a lot of smuggling into China still, because the manufacturers still prefer recyclables from overseas, from Japan, North America, and Europe, because they're better quality than what they generate at home. But it's about manufacturing and it's about consumers. And, as their consumer class has risen, they're generating their own recycling. And so they don't have as much need for North American and European and Japanese and Australian stuff, but they still need it because it tends to be better sorted, a little bit cleaner. So they still like it. And if they can smuggle it in, they will. That's a dangerous game. So I hate to do this. I have the morning Asia Pacific meeting for Bloomberg editorial that I need to pop onto in just a minute here.
Sure.
So.
Thank you
so-
so much for your
Thank
wisdom.
you.
Yeah, I apologize. I have to jump off. I hate to do that, but they wanted me on it today. It just came up today.
Very interesting. Thank you, Adam.
Well,
Very-
thanks for
thank
the
you.
invitation. Okay, guys, thanks so much and have me anytime. I'd love to join.
Yeah,
All right.
Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Well, I think if memory serves me, this is probably one of the first times a family member or a child spoke at one of our meetings, and I think it's absolutely enriching and wonderful.
Yeah.
We
I
we
agree.
had it last month with Seth.
Oh, okay. I
Seth
wasn't-
Schreiber.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
missed-
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I could add a couple of things to that. Now, Adam knows more about worldwide scrap than probably anybody. But when it comes to the nitty gritty and getting down to the scrap facility, that's my expertise.
Yeah.
And one of the stories, when the Chinese first started to come here, everybody was very doubtful of them. And I was one of the first scrap dealers to start doing business with the Chinese. And I met them at a convention and we sat down and we talked about getting paid. So they came to Minneapolis and they brought in their luggage, suitcases full of dollar bills.
Hmm.
So if they bought from us, they would pay us on the spot and they would trust us to send exactly what we want. But when you have cash and you're dealing with scrap dealers, it's like a hungry bunch of wolves. They get the best price and the scrap dealer gets what he wants. He gets the cash.
When I was traveling on the road plane, if I wanted to find a Jewish person, I either found the deli, a barbecue rib place, or whoever was a scrap dealer in all the small towns across the country.
Yeah.
Same story everywhere. So no matter
What
who-
about Joey, what about the retail clothier?
Yeah, also, yep. But usually a rib place or a scrapyard were Jews. So if you're in that mood, you'd find them. But littlest towns, my wife is from Marshalltown, Iowa. The scrap dealer there is the richest guy in town. He's the king of the town. Where my uncle was, Little Falls, all scrap dealers. So it's a very common. I think it started by the forwarders in New York and forwarding those people across the country is where it really started. Mr. Brothen was one of those people. He was the Minneapolis version of a forwarder. And he used to forward to those towns, but scrap was home.
I'm sorry, Joe, what do you mean by forwarder?
He would, when the people came in off the boat, there were people in New York, because New York couldn't absorb all the people that were there. So my grandpa was forwarded to Columbia Heights to a dairy. He was a farmer in
Oh, I
Lithuania. But they would forward them and also to all these small towns, and they became scrap dealers. So it's like Mr. Leader started, because actually Mickey Mader is actually my relative, because his Aunt Gita is my uncle's wife.
Yeah.
So it's like a small world.
Something Adam didn't point out too is my grandfather, when he first got here, worked for Larry Grumman's
Oh,
grandfather. He had a big scrapyard.
Oh,
So it was J. Grumman Iron and Steel, and he
Yeah.
was the biggest at one time. But
Yeah.
that's how my grandfather got his start in understanding how to sort metal from the Grumman Steel Company.
but there was a lot of stories like what happened with a streetcar company in Minneapolis, around the country, where there's a Jew, there's a kid can type person, there's someone at the heart of it all. And they started that scam of pulling up the railroad tracks, pulling down the lines, all for the scrap. They could care less about having buses. They really wanted the scrap. And it happened all over. So
Copper wire, they needed copper wire to run the streetcars, of course.
But those streetcar wires were very valuable. Those tracks were very valuable, and you'll see there's a kind of correlation between the junkyard guys, the scrapyard guys, the auto records, the Walensky's of the world, the Midwest. It goes on and on and on. But at the heart of it all is Jewish people, as well as bootlegging too. You might throw that in for another one too.
yeah. Interesting.
Now we got white walls on now. We look really nice and clean, and we're doctors, and lawyers, and all kinds of stuff. But if you want to go back somewhere along the line, you're going to find something that isn't so cool.
Well,
Carol's family is Kaplan brothers in St. Paul. And a lot of the biggest lawyers in town are kids from the Kaplan family. And they, they were in it for years. Mickey knows them well, I think.
Yeah, Reuben and Louis were very good friends of mine.
Yeah.
In fact, when I think about Reuben's been dead now for maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
Reuben used to call me every morning at 6:30 for years until he retired. He couldn't start the day without calling me. And we talk every morning about the markets. And of course, I was in the car crushing business, and I would have 5 loads of cars a day coming out of the scrapyard on Girard Avenue, which is now belongs to the city, and it's sitting there vacant. But out of that little place, I was the largest handler of cars, bigger than all these other scrapyards, and I'd sell directly to North Star Steel. They are also out of business. But
Do you realize we've got a celebrity in our midst who's carrying on the tradition, you guys?
Well, I used to be in charge of recycling for Pepsi when I originally went to work for them, and I had a landfill the bottles. In New York, you have a deposit, you have to return the bottles, and wherever they're collected, there's a deposit on it. So I would take them to the landfill. I didn't personally do, but I arranged for that. Used to cost me $500 a truck to get the truck there, $500 to get rid of it at the landfill. Well, Trex started in Connecticut, the flooring stuff that makes decks. And they came to us and said, we can use bottles to make Trex. So they bought bottles from us. So I made $500 a load from them, getting rid of my bottles. But we used to get anywhere from 75 to 150 loads a day of empty bottles. So think about that plastic.
Jeez.
And we had the territory basically covered the whole East Coast. So that's all the plastic. You just can't imagine how much plastic there was and how much that really cost to get rid of. But Trex originally was based on shredded soda bottles, what it was, and water bottles.
Wow.
So
I want you to-
it's all over.
yeah, I want you to know something. As far as the Internal Revenue Service, they have really clamped down on pawn shops, scrap yards, and everything. And we can't make a sale unless we have the guy's driver's license and his home address. And otherwise, that business of taking it and just writing it to somebody's name, that's long gone. That's been gone for about 8 or 10 years. But before the government got involved, all you needed was a name. You could write Steve Heller, pay him $1,000 in cash, and nobody would care our check. That doesn't exist anymore. Those were fun days for scrap dealers.
Yeah, I bet.
Fun and profitable, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
The recyclable business is now big in the patio furniture business now. They're using this artificial plastic that looks like wood, and they're making furniture on it. One of the biggest categories there is.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sub businesses that come out of that. I used to handle scrap for Northwestern Airlines when it was Northwestern here. That's what they had their main mechanics in Minnesota. So every month they have this big, huge room, and they let the scrap dealers in, and you would bid on the pile. So, I mean, I used to buy it all the time, and I made a specialty out of understanding the high temperature alloys that they use in engines. So that was one of the things that gave me a start when I began, is understanding. At one time, there was no electronic devices to tell what metals were. You had to have experience, you had to use grinders, you could use the spark. There are many, that's what we used to do before we had metal analyzers.
I think you used a magnet too, didn't you, Mickey?
You do use a magnet too. And how the metal draws is dependent on what the alloy is too. So that all plays a part of it. And actually, when I was younger, I was the one who did those things. And that's what we did. In our family, hard work was what we did. That's what we did.
Well, what I used to do on Saturdays, it has to do with your Uncle Mort, actually. And my dad and I used to he was a plumber, and they used copper fittings. So there's always scraps from the copper that nobody would pick up or use. because, and they leave it at the job site. So if it's new construction, it's all kinds of copper. So my dad and I would go to eat Blondie's Diner up on Plymouth Avenue first, the tradition. And we go to the job site, pick up copper, and then bring it to Leader Brothers to hock it. And that was like how we made a lot of extra money, but the copper buckets and buckets full of copper.
Well, I'll tell you another story. When the Mall of America was being built, they would, a lot of the stuff that was used and some of the stuff that was new would go out the back door and they bring it to the scrap dealer. So I bought all kinds of stuff from plumbers, electricians, and everything. And I said to myself, the quality of the materials they were using, that Mall of America will never be a success. This is a money-losing business, I thought. Well, you can see it now. I really knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Morton Leader was also my cousin.
Oh,
More leaders.
His wife,
Yes.
I know.
So my Aunt Gita was his sister, right?
Yeah, that's right. My mother and Gita were sisters.
Yeah, right.
In fact, I took Gita to Mexico when her son was dying.
Oh, yes, yes.
I took her down there to see Chucky when he was passing away. So, and her son David is still very active in the theater, and they're doing well. And Gita and David is doing very well. He was the director of theater in Arizona. I don't know if he's still doing that now. I don't talk to him that often, but a very talented guy.
tell us more about Adam, Mickey. I think that he went beyond a BA, didn't he? And he.
I don't know what I did, but I did something here. I did
Oh.
something. Anyway, I can still tell you. Adam went to the University of Chicago. So he graduated, and when he went to Chicago, they wanted him to go for a PhD in philosophy. Adam was not interested in that. Adam, extremely bright guy. So anyway, he was accepted to Harvard Law School. So I thought I was having some environmental problems at the time with the city. So I took Adam and I sent him to Washington to see, the name of the guy's name was Dave, I forget his last name. And he spent the summer with learning about law and engaging himself with what they were doing. So he came back and he said, Dad, I can't do this. These lawyers are not the kind of people that I want to deal with. So he said, I'm not going to go back there. So then Adam decided he would take some time and he wanted to be a doctor. So he went to medical school and he was accepted to medical school, and he wasn't accepted to medical school, but he was accepted to the school, and he decided, you know what, Dad, I don't want to do that. So then Adam, I was going to China. I've been to China 20 times. So I took, so Adam wanted to go to China. So next thing I knew, Adam had a job in Beijing teaching English. So that's how he ended up in China. That's how he became an expert.
How old is he, Mick?
Adam is 51. I can't imagine I have a 51-year-old son.
Mine's going to be 54 November 1st.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, time marches on. I have a friend, her name is Sharon Nelson, and she's been a good close friend of mine. She happens to be the sister of Prince, you know. So she and I become very good friends. So she is putting on a birthday party for me on the 12th of November at Paisley Park. So if any of you guys would like to come, certainly if you haven't been to Paisley Park, it's something to see, all the awards and honors. And she's personally going to have some guides and everything else so everybody can see this. But if you guys would like to come, I'd love to have you come. So anyway, that's kind of, that's a sidelight, but time marches.
Nikki, how much of your youth and Hazakim have you shared with Adam?
Not very much. Not very much.
Is
The
he
only reason I
interested?
ask is,
What,
Yes.
why, Bruce? You said,
because I've had two experiences as a result of these calls. The first was in putting together the memorial 2 years ago with Ross. There was an awful lot of opportunity to talk about what it meant to me, which he had always felt. And he was talking about he wished he had had an experience like this. It's what Rabbi Davis talked about. And then I put Seth Schreiber in touch with Dale Bluestein
mhm,
because of the issue that came up around the National Honor Society article in the Jewish World that Shell's mother had placed, and Seth's research that showed that the vast majority of the National Honor Scholars were Jewish and they were Hazakimers. And Seth said, I wish I had had an experience like that. And I've been kind of thinking about the next level of legacy and what we give our kids, etc. So that was why. And in fact, I just think before you got on, Steve, I put Dale Bluestein in touch with Seth to include that piece in the video. And the key to it is Marv's statement about he was animated, Mr. Burstein was, and he said, we were good. And I wanted Dale to expand the notion of good to be more than just sports, that it was also academically and it was in social leadership, etc. So that's why I was asking.
I see.
And wherever I go, there's always people in the business. And just like when we played in St. Paul against, I don't know, for the championship, and there was a guy named Michael Silverman. He played in the Twin City game. And Michael and I always talked about the games that we played. We were young at that time. They were older, and we beat them. So, wherever I go, I can always find scrap people to talk to, relate to, whatever. If I needed whatever I need, if I'm gonna have a problem, I can find a scrap person in the area, someone that I know. It's easy for me in the upper Midwest just to call up all kinds of people that I've known and done business with for years.
It's interesting. My kids have both been fascinated by what our group has done and the relationships. They're fascinated because they didn't have it. And part of the reason they didn't have it is, Jewish spread out in the Twin Cities.
Sure.
When they went to high school and grew up in Edina, there were only a handful of Jewish people. Carol's dad said, why are you going there? There are no Jews. Well, turned out there was a rabbi who was the first resident of Edina. I think Rabbi Rutman from St. Paul moved over here. But, they have lots of good friends, but they're not Jewish. Almost none of them are Jewish. So few, but, and they got those friends by going to Talmud Torah, basically, or going to bar mitzvah classes, but they never got it, from being in school, 8 hours a day or whatever it was every week. So,
Mhm.
You lived in the ghetto, really, is what it was.
We
Yeah,
lived in a ghetto, but we didn't know what a ghetto was.
we didn't know.
Yes.
We didn't know.
Yeah.
We
They
thought
lived
that's the way the world
block and a
turned.
half from me.
Yeah.
Everybody was walking distance of each other.
Yeah.
Mark was around the corner. I mean, it just everybody was, you really got a little bit of freedom when you got down on a bike, but really we walked everywhere. So
Yeah.
so you became friends with people. That was it.
Yeah, and remember there was a streetcar that ran up and down Plymouth Avenue.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you could hop on that, I don't know, what was it, a nickel, 7 cents or something like that? I don't even remember.
There was one on Plymouth Avenue and there was one on Golden Valley Road.
Okay, yeah, I don't
And
remember.
and the last time I was in Mexico City, those streetcars are in Mexico City now, or were.
Probably the same ones.
Yes, yeah,
We
with the
are
wicker
probably,
seats.
we are probably the results of just of a neighborhood being confined to a neighborhood. And
That's
that's how the
right.
relationships develop.
Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Well, I mean, that was a big change when we moved from Willard to Lincoln Junior High School. When we went there, we were, the Willard guys, we hung together because we didn't know any different. We've never been exposed to the real world where everything came together.
North really did it.
Yeah, but it's true.
Sure.
Yeah, each level of school, you got a merger with a bunch of new people.
Yes.
Willard was at one point, I don't remember, I was told that the percentage of Jewish kids at Willard School was at one point like 90%. I still don't believe that, but
Yeah.
it was very high. And when we got to the next level at Lincoln, it was a lot smaller. And when we got to North, it was a lot smaller than that.
Stanley, remember
pro-
when there was a Jewish holiday, the school would just about close down.
Yeah,
There was
nobody there.
Nobody came to Willard. That's right.
Out east, the school is shut. There is no school, like in New York, Philadelphia, no school.
A lot of this is perception. For example, St. Louis Park at no time was ever more than 27% Jewish.
Mm.
That's a pretty high percentage when the city population is what, 2-3%
Well-
maybe?
But if you ask somebody that question, Stan, in 1962 or whatever, what was the Jewish population of St. Louis Park? What would people say? 50, 60?
It was St. Jewish, St. Jewish Park, right?
Yeah, right.
Still is to many people.
But it was funny because I had the same misperception about the percentage of Black students at Lincoln. I thought it was a third, and a third, and you guys have corrected that for me.
I think there were maybe, when we got to North, I think we maybe graduated with, I'd be surprised if there were a dozen Black kids that graduated with us.
Black kids normally didn't graduate from.
Or even started with us, Mick. You know, they didn't even get that far.
It was that low?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you know, we
The starting number was high. The
had
graduating.
we had 740 people that graduated, mostly, but not mostly, partially because Brooklyn Center did not have a high school yet. So remember, those kids were bussed in, a couple of hundred were bussed in from Brooklyn Center. By the way,
also from
25,
Minnetonka. There was
20,
all these kids from Oak
25%.
Knoll.
Yes, Oak Knoll, that was right. Yeah.
Huh.
25% of our class is no longer alive.
Wow.
Yeah,
I remember a statistic, and I don't know if it's valid, that the initial Black mix of people at North was 11%. So that would have been about 75, 77. That doesn't seem unreasonable. 80?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
doesn't seem unreasonable, but I couldn't name them.
no.
I couldn't even think of who they might be. They didn't last very long.
Yeah.
No.
And I remember all of us would walk to school
Mhm.
and we'd all go together, you know. I lived across the alley from Shell Shriver. And if we went to North High School, everybody walked. Yeah, it was amazing. We used to walk every day.
Ricky Rifkin was your neighbor?
What?
Ricky Rifkin was in back of your house.
Yeah, Ricky Rifkin was, absolutely. There was a lot of people that these connections that you made will always be there for you. You know,
There was a big caravan down 16th, I think, was everybody kind of merged and it became a bigger and bigger group as you got to school.
Yeah. It was those Hellers, that's what did it.
Yeah.
We're the fancy people.
Hmm.
Well, you know what? Adam said he'd come back. And there are a lot of more. Adam went to Poland to follow Edward's, my brother Ed Zeman. He's currently the president of ADA. And he and Adam went to Poland to see where Max was born. That's Ed's dad. And they went there and they found where he lived. They found his house. And Adam documented it. It was very interesting. So Adam is really interested in genealogy. He often sometimes part of our family that I don't even know on the Minter side will send me notes and letters. I just turn them over to Adam and let him handle it. Genealogy is not something that I'm really that interested in.
I got notice from Ancestry 3 days ago that there was a very good match for me. It happened to be my youngest son. No, seriously,
That's
for this,
good.
I'm paying money to be told that.
That's funny.
Well, should we throw in the towel at this point? What do you think?
Do we have someone for next month, Bruce?
Yes,
Mickey
we have
Lee.
Mickey Lee is going to
Oh,
talk
okay.
about his, which should be, and we are also recording now sessions based on the decision we made. So we will convert this, it will go to our YouTube site. So people who miss it, they'll get a chance to see it. But yes, Mickey has November. Shell Block had talked about doing December, but if someone has a burning desire, be more than happy to move the schedule for December.
I was a little late, Bruce. Can you tell me just a quick update on the Hazakim video? Is it
Sure.
coming along okay?
Yes, actually, it's coming along very well. I just saw your whole interview, actually, which was stellar. In all seriousness, I mean, he asked some questions that weren't particularly relevant, but I think you did a really nice job. He's going to the Czech Republic for a commemoration of the 1100 Torahs that were gathered there and then distributed around the world at the beginning of World War II. When he comes back, he'll work full time on it. All the videoing is done. Shel Schreiberg was going to get to Jimmy Archer to see if Jimmy would come aboard for an interview. If not, we've got more than enough. We've laid out the outline for it. The quality of the videography is wonderful. It is really very high quality. And we're looking at between December 15th and January 1st as the first draft finished.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so it's coming very, very nicely. And
Bruce,
so that's,
Bruce,
yes.
part of the evening at Steve's house was the photographer and he took pictures of us. What are they
Right.
doing with those pictures? Is that being incorporated into the video or are they doing something separate with those photographs?
No, he just thought it would be nice to have a consistent set of pictures of everyone who is there. So we have them to use them as a voiceover, kind of face for a voiceover. So he, if it was up to me, I would not have paid extra money to have him there, the photographer. But Dale took it out of his salary and that was fine. I saw the pictures. There's some really very nice pictures. He did a nice job of it.
Nice.
I was going to say he's going to save them for our obituaries, but I didn't want to go there.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah. Well, once
Mickey,
again, thank you, Bruce. And
Yeah,
thank you,
Mickey,
Mickey. Thank you.
Mickey, can I say something? I think that's the first time I've ever seen your son or heard of him. You've got to be very proud. He seems to be very accomplished
Absolutely.
and well-spoken. And it was
Yeah.
very entertaining, Mickey.
I am proud of Adam. Adam's done a good job. But my other son, Aaron, who also is very involved in politics, he works for Nancy Pelosi. He's a senior advisor for Nancy. And at the time, when things were going like this, I thought maybe I'd have Aaron come someday to talk about
Yeah.
his
Let's do it.
tenure.
Yes.
that'd be
let's
neat.
do it.
I think it's really great. Marv, I kind of had the same reaction. I wasn't sure. He's very youthful looking. I didn't know if it was a son or a grandson, Mick.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And what am I
I
going
don't
to
think
get?
that was a compliment, Mick.
Oh,
When
thank
am
you,
I going to
Stan.
get, Mickey, when I called you the other day, I said I sent you 6 empty soda cans. When am I going to get payment?
Yeah. I have to have your identification. We can't pay you without your driver's license.
Yeah, right.
I'll send you a W-2.
Yeah.
Mr. Greenberg, are you okay? You look like you got a cold.
He's.
I have a cold.
You look like it. Just a
Yeah.
cold?
I don't know. It's not COVID, but
Okay,
I've
good.
been coughing for about 2 weeks.
Oh,
Oh. Well,
I hope you feel better.
yeah.
Thank you. Liz has it worse than I do.
really?
Yes,
The gift that keeps giving, huh?
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wish her our best, please.
Yeah, of course, please.
Take care, Joe.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank
Have a
you.
good week.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.